So let's do an experiment. Can everyone stand up, please, again? I know you have to get a laptop and whatever. Okay, now sit down if you're not currently managing an online community. Okay, why do you guys do it? Now sit down if, in your opinion, your community has less than 100 people that have made a contribution within the last month. I know you don't have the data, but just think. Okay, now sit down if, in your opinion, your community has less than 500 members that have made an active contribution within the last month. Okay, now 1,000 members. 5,000 members. 10,000 members. 50,000 members. It's like a competition. 100,000 members. 500,000 members. 1 million members that have actually made a contribution within the last month. 5 million members. 10 million members. 50 million members. Wow. That's amazing. So I think that the average there was around 1,000 or so. I think that's about where most normal human beings would have to sit down. Now, do you guys think that is above the average or below the average for branded communities? So raise your hand if you think that 1,000 is above the average. And raise your hand if you think it's below the average. So last year, I spent a lot of time trying to work out how many branded communities were successful. So how many organizations that have launched an online community actually reach a bare minimum of 100 active members, people that are actually making a contribution to that community. And so I went onto the Brand Republic website in the UK, and I searched for the term launches an online community. And it gave me a list of around 967 organizations that had launched an online community. So I spent a day or so clicking through every single link. And I wanted to find out whether that community still existed, how many members were actively participating in that community. And what I found is that of that 967, there were just 12 where the links still worked for that community, and just 2 that I could find that had more than 100 actively participating members. That's 2 out of 967. But it's a UK website, so maybe we in the UK are just incredibly bad at building communities. So I went on to an advertising agent in the USA, and again did the same thing, and I had an intern who wanted to give me some help this time, and we had around 750 results. We removed the Facebooks, Twitters and all that. And we found here we had around 30 organizations whose communities still existed, and of those 30 there were 3 to 4 that had more than 100 actively participating members. Which means, from this sample at least, that the number of organizations that have launched a community that have reached at least 100 actively participating members is around 0.4%. Which means for every one of you guys here, there's around 249 people that didn't succeed. Which means you guys aren't just above average, you are incredibly above average. Yes, round of applause. And I think right now, organizations, when they develop communities, aren't doing a good enough job. And we are victims of the success bias, where we only hear about the communities that are successful. And what we don't know is that for every community that succeeds, there are many more that fail. And I think the reason why this isn't because we're not good at getting people to visit that community in the first place. I think what the issue is that we're very bad at keeping members actively participating. We're very bad at converting someone that visits that community for the very first time into a regular active participant. And I think one of the things that we need to get much better at is making our communities these addictive places where our members visit not only once, but they visit several times a day because it's an addictive community for them to visit. Over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, we have done so much research on what makes a community addictive, what makes a community successful. We have, and I know there's any academics in the room, but we have read more academic articles than I would wish upon anybody. We have done surveys of around 1,300 members. We have interviewed around 110 to 130 members. We have gone through the databases of 7 very large online forums, all trying to work out what elements make a community addictive. And we've broken it down into 5 that I think tend to work in every type of community. And within each of these communities, within each of these elements, what you'll find is that none of them cost a lot of money to implement. They're things that every single person in this room can just drop into that community. And they're relatively cheap to do. It's something that doesn't take a lot of effort to do. And the first, by the way, I was talking to, do you know Katie Cody at all? Do you know her? So she was telling me that she goes to a lot of these events, and there's often a lot of great advice that's shared, but it's not tactical enough. So what I've tried to do is make every recommendation that we give as tactical as it can possibly be. So the first one is to get the concept right. The single biggest reason why our communities aren't as successful as what they should be is that the very concept of that community is wrong. Is that the concept isn't aligned to an existing motivation we have. There are too many organizations that will launch an online community, and they will be very surprised that if they launch a community about themselves, their members don't want to participate. Because even though people might buy from the company, even though they might like the company, they don't want to spend their spare time talking about that company. And if you can just get the concept right, if you can just align it with an existing motivation that people have, what you find is that it immediately becomes a more sticky community. So what we need to know is that we don't want to participate in communities to connect and share information. No one right now wakes up and in bed every morning and thinks, wow, I wish I could share more information, or I wish I could connect with more people. We do it to satisfy an existing motivation we have. We will connect and share information because we want more power, we want a bigger reputation, but be something specific that we actually want. So we don't want to connect and share information. What we do want to do is to satisfy the existing motivations we have. Which begs the question, what are the existing motivations we have? And there's lots of different theories regarding that, but one easy one is to use BJ Fogg's motivations. You guys know his work? Some of you? Awesome. So he basically breaks it down into 6 different categories here. The first one is pleasure. So we might join and participate in a community because that act of participation is a pleasurable thing in itself. Second one is pain. We might participate in a community to remove the pain that we have in our lives. The third is hope. So we might participate in a community because we want to change something in the future, or we want to improve ourselves in some particular way. The fourth one is fear. So we might join and participate in a community to remove a fear we have about what's going on. The fifth one is social acceptance, where we might join a community because we want to be accepted into a peer group that we find desirable. And the fifth one is social rejection, where we might join and participate in a community because we don't want to be rejected by a group of people that we want to fit in with. So here's some examples. So take the Huffington Post community. Why did people participate in the community for the Huffington Post? And there could be lots of motivations, but the one that tends to stand out most is that they participate to complain about Republicans. And in that act of just complaining about Republicans is a pleasurable activity for this group in itself. Or another one, take Wikipedia. How many of you saw the Star Trek film Into Darkness? And how many of you went to the Wikipedia page of Star Trek Into Darkness? And how many of you went to the talk page for the Wikipedia entry for Star Trek Into Darkness? Good for you guys. But if you had, what you would have found there was a 40,000 word discussion about whether to capitalize the I of the new Star Trek film Into Darkness. That's a 40,000 word discussion about whether to capitalize the I. Now, to most of us sane people in the room, that's an insane thing to do. But to this group of people, to the Wikipedia editors, the people that live for this stuff, it's a very pleasurable activity in itself for some reason. So if you can identify specifically what within the activity is a pleasurable thing to do, it's a lot easier to get that community off the ground. Or take backpacking life. How many of you heard of backpacking life? So there are so many online communities in the travel sector at the moment. And there's so many online communities in the backpacking sector. But the genius of what Backpacking Live did is that they found that one specific pain point that their audience had, And they develop that entire community concept around that point. If you want to reduce a couple of grams in your backpack, if you want to spend a lot of money finding the most lightweight material you have, Backpacking Light is the absolute perfect community for you. So they identified that one specific pain point, and they developed the entire community around that one point. We'll take the community for home base here, the Get Into Gardening. So I live in London, and I don't really know what a garden looks like. But if I did want to get into gardening, I'd find it to be a very scary thing to do. I wouldn't know where to begin, I wouldn't know what tools to use, I really had no idea how to do any gardening at all. But there's a community that's set up me by Homebase. Homebase didn't build a community about themselves. They identified one specific pain point their audience had, and they developed their entire community concept around that. I'll take a Fitbit. How many of you own a Fitbit? Did you guys get a rash? I'm curious to ask. So Fitbit had two types of communities. One is the customer service style community. So you go there, you have an issue with your Fitbit, maybe you have a rash, and you ask a question here and you hopefully get help. The second one is a community for people that hope to be better than what they are now. A community for people that want to change something. A community for people that want to share their stories. A community for people that want to learn how to get better sleep. A community for people that want to know what to eat and improve themselves and their bodies in some particular way. They identified that one hope thing. They identified what the audience wants to be in the future, and they built their entire community concept around that. We'll take a Cancer Connection in Canada. So this is a community built around fear. Cancer Connection identified the one fear point that their members have, which is they don't want to go through this alone. And they developed their entire community around that. The discussions are around that, the activities are around that, the concept is around that. They identified that one pain point, that one fear point that members have, and they developed the entire community concept around that. Or home energy professionals. It doesn't just have to be in the health sector. So if you join the home energy professionals community, you'll find that it's a community in a way that's built around fear. It's a community for people in the home energy space trying to make sense of the new laws or the new legislation. They developed that one, they identified that one pain point, and they developed the entire community around that. And that's where I think we need to be going at the moment. We don't want to build communities about brands or about companies. We want to do a much better job of identifying that one conceptual thing, that one thing attached to an existing motivation that we have, and build an entire community around that. If you're finding that you have lots of members or lots of people that are visiting your community, but they're not sticking, they're not converting into participants, it's usually, at least in my experience, the very concept of that community is wrong. So if you can identify specifically what that pain point is, what that one existing motivation is, and build an entire community around that, you're going to have a much more successful community as a result. Or take the Reserve Club created by Diego. So no one in this room is allowed to join that, unless you're one of the top bartenders in the USA. Is anyone one of the top bartenders in the USA? Because that would be cool. But what you find, because it's an exclusive community, everyone wants to join it. Everyone thinks that they're going to be one of the top, or everyone that's a bartender thinks it's going to be one of the top communities. So they want to join this sort of communities. Or take Meru here. They didn't build a community about their wireless products. They developed a community for the top wireless experts in the world to join and interact and participate. By raising the bar, by having an exclusive community, it's a lot easier to get that community off the ground. So what we want to be doing is identifying what that one big concept is and build a community around that. That might mean changing the concept we already have, but just by making that one change, it's easier to get that community off the ground. And Model Mayhem, if you are a model, and none of you look like you are, I was joking. I feel really awkward about it. Then Model Mayhem is the perfect community for you. Like every single model in the USA, or everyone worth any merit, is a member of this community. So you have to join it, or you have to risk that social rejection. So in every type of topic, you can develop a community concept that's going to be very powerful for your audience. So imagine, for example, that you're developing a community for, say, HR professionals. So you might build a community based around pleasure, for HR professionals to share their funniest stories in the profession, and it's probably going to be a concept that resonates very strongly with your audience. You might build it around pain, for HR professionals that are struggling with one particular issue, how to give great feedback or response. Or you might build it around hope, for HR professionals that want to change something in their sector or be better at what they do. You might base it around fear to make sense of the legislation that's coming up. Or you might build a community exclusively for the top HR professionals. But in every single topic, there are different types of concepts you can have. And we want to be much more effective at building this right sorts of concepts based around an existing motivation. Which begs the question, what are the best motivations? What motivations tend to convert the best? So we studied this with 7 relatively large online forums. We were changing the different appeals and trying to figure out what actually works the best here. And we went, actually, let me ask you, so which of these motivations do you think is most effective at getting people to join and participate in a community? So raise your hand if you think having no appeal is most effective. Good. So raise your hand if you think that a pleasure appeal is most effective. And pain? Hope? Fear? Social inclusion? Social rejection? So we've actually studied this in a variety of different ways through the forums, and we found that having no appeal has a conversion rate of around 8%. Having a pleasure appeal has a conversion rate of around 25%. That immediately, just by changing that one thing, you can have far more people participating in your community. Having a pain appeal had a conversion rate of 29%. Having a hope appeal had a conversion rate of 15%. Having a fear appeal also had a conversion rate of 15%. Having a social inclusion appeal had a conversion rate of 37%. And it's very difficult to study the social rejection appeal. You basically have to write a message that says, if you don't join this community, your friends won't like you anymore. Which is a difficult thing to test. So what you'll notice is that social inclusion tends to stand out. But the catch of that is that when you make a community an exclusive community, less people visit that community in the first place, so it tends to balance out a little bit. But you can test these different appeals. You can find out what works best for your community and have far higher conversion rates and more people participating as a result of that. So you want to attach your concept to an existing motivation that people have. And it also makes sense to align that messaging from the very first time people hear about your community, all the way through to their first participation. And then you also want to be making sure that their first contribution is a motivating question, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. The second thing is the initial feedback. How many people in a community that participate once don't participate again? How many of you think it's more than 50%? Less than 50%? Wow. So what we found is that it's around 40 to 90%, depending on the type of community. But the key thing here, the key thing that seems to hook people, the key thing that seems to get people participating over the long term are 3 things. So the speed. The speed of response to their first contribution is absolutely critical. So we studied this. We began using a variety of forums to run a variety of different queries to find out if you make a quick contribution to someone's very first participation in your community, how likely is it that they will participate? And what we found is that if you respond within the first 5 hours, there's around a 53% chance that they will make a second contribution within that community. But if you wait 24 hours, that immediately drops to around, around 10%? But even 5 hours is a long time, right? So what if we broke that down into 300 minutes? And what we found is that there's a big difference between responding within the first 15 minutes and responding within the first hour. And if you immediately want to increase the number of people that are participating in your community, if you want far higher conversion rates than what you have now, then respond as quickly as you can. And that doesn't mean that you personally can respond to every single post that someone makes. But you can make sure using a moderation team or your volunteers that every member that makes their first contribution gets a rapid response. And even if you can't do this for every single member, then it still makes sense to do it for as many members as possible. Imagine if you did it for, say, 5 members a day and just 3 of them become regular active members. Over the course of a year, that would be 1,000 new regular active members for your community. So that will double the size of your community, right? And for most of us, that means we're due for a pay rise to have 100% growth in our community. The second one is that in your actual response, when you respond to that person, you want to respond with a question of some kind. What happens far too often is that someone will make their first contribution to a community, and it'll be a question about that topic. And the community manager will answer that question. And the problem with answering that question is that then that's the end of that discussion. That member goes away and they don't participate again. There's no motivation for anyone else in that community to respond and participate. So you don't want to be answering the question. You want to be asking further questions. You want to ask them for more information about whatever they asked about. You want to reveal some personal information about yourselves. So what do you personally think about that topic? If a member asks the question, what is your experience in that topic? The goal in someone's first contribution is to get them to make a second contribution. You want to get them into the habit of visiting and participating in that community on a regular basis. Does that make sense, Phil? Awesome. And the third one is impact. How many of you personally welcome your new members to the community? Yeah. Okay. So it turns out welcoming your new members isn't the best use of your time. Even though it does increase the conversion rates, there are so many members that join and naturally won't become actively participating members. What does make a big difference is if you personally welcome someone after they've made their first contribution. Is that when you find someone's made their first contribution, then you drop them a note and you say specifically that their contribution had an impact. So it helped this member, or it made you think about this thing in a different way, but you have to prick their ego. You have to make sure that their ego is in some minor way invested in that community very early on. The moment they feel they can have an impact within that community, the more they'll become readily addicted and participating within that group. So you want to respond as quickly as you possibly can. You want to be asking a question in your own response, and then you want to drop them a note and highlight the impact that they've had. But what makes us continue participating within that community is if we feel that we are unique. When someone feels that they can influence the community, when someone feels that they have a unique experience or unique expertise that they can offer, they're far more likely to continue participating within that group. So let me ask you a question. What do you think this guy is doing at the moment? Like, not literally, I know you can see what he's doing. Why do you think he's doing this? Sorry? Standing to stand out? At the moment, this guy is conforming more to a group than he ever will in his life. He is dressed exactly the same as everybody else. He is wearing the same outfit as everyone else. He is standing in line like everyone else. He even looks the same as everyone else. But yet, when that camera comes to him, he just can't help himself, can he? So why is he doing that? It could be that he doesn't like the photographer. It's possible. But I think it's more likely, as some of you said, that he wants to be unique within that group for some particular way. He's selecting a strategy to achieve that positive distinctiveness amongst that group. So even at the same time that we want to conform to the groups that we feel we are a part of, we also want to be seen unique in a way that we think will impress our peers. Does that make sense, everyone? So we want to be unique in a way that impresses our peers. One of my first online communities was in the video gaming sector. I spent a lot of time in my youth going around to these major video gaming events. And what I found is that video gamers did a lot of things to conform to the group. What was also interesting is that nearly every single person selected a strategy to be unique amongst that group. And when that wasn't possible, when people couldn't see the strategies of other people that had been unique amongst that group, they tended not to participate. So for this member, he would wear a mask. That was his strategy to achieve that positive distinctiveness. For me, I quickly realized I wasn't going to be one of the top players, but I began writing about the top video game players. I began managing online communities. That was my strategy to be seen as unique amongst my peers. That's my strategy to gain the acceptance of my peers and to impress them. There's one kid who I'll never forget, who was the first person I ever banned from an online community. And every day for a year, he would message me, ask me to be unbanned. Every day for a year he did this. Then finally I relented and I let him back into the community. Within 15 minutes, he had made a post that was simultaneously homophobic, racist, sexist, and offended every sponsor the community had. Now he spent a year building up to that, and I don't think he made that post to be racist or homophobic. I don't think that's who he was. I think what he was doing was selecting a strategy that he felt would impress the jokers of the group, that would impress the other members in the community that he cared about. So we want to be seen unique in some particular way. If you can identify what members value about themselves, what unique skills and expertise they think they have, and provide them with opportunities where they can showcase that unique expertise and their unique attributes that they have, they're far more likely to participate over the long term. Which is why Reddit here, with their Ask Me Anything, is such an incredibly powerful tool. Because absolutely anybody can post a discussion and say, ask me anything. So I am an amateur motorcycle racer, ask me anything. I'm the only female employee in a mid-sized IT company, ask me anything. So by providing that means for people to be unique and to showcase their unique, how unique they are, they're far more likely to continue participating. And there are so many ideas like this that you can borrow from other online communities and get people participating. So that's why it's good to have lots of opportunities where people can do that. And that's why giving the same badge to every member doesn't help any member feel unique in any particular way. And it's also why interviewing members and asking them questions about what makes them unique is such a powerful tool. It's such a great tool to get people to continue participating within that community. So we want to be asking members about what makes them unique. In the registration form of that community itself, ask your members, what can you offer that community? What makes you unique? What skills and expertise do you have? We want to be providing opportunities for members to showcase how unique they are. And you can borrow these from any type of community you want. And then you want to be highlighting their unique contributions. Next is to forge real relationships. So how many of you have made friends with people you originally met in an online community? Most of you. So we began in the interviews we did with members, asking them, why do they keep coming back to that community? And one of the most common answers we had was because their friends are in that community. They have friends there. And the next question was always the same. How did that friendship begin? And the answers were always, they shared a common experience. And the problem was, in most communities, that the community manager didn't initiate enough possible common experiences. So back in 2008, I was working with Seth Godin in New York to launch the Tribes community. Did you read his book, Tribes? It was a great book. So one of the things he did very early on in the life cycle of that community was said, hey, it'd be great if we had a book of case studies that we can give to our members. And the community just went about and they made that happen. He did nothing else, but as a result of working together, as a result of being in that collaborating situation, they were able to forge these real relationships that continue to this day. So one of the great things you can do is to create lots of opportunities where people can find their friends amongst that group, where they can build those relationships amongst that group. And one of the things we also found is that when people build those relationships, when they build their friendship group within that community, is that they go somewhere else to continue participating in that group. That might be WhatsApp, that might be Skype groups, that might be mailing lists. And a lot of people seem to be concerned that in these sorts of groups, people won't visit the community platform anymore. We found no evidence that happens. What we did find is that when people feel that they are participating in a group amongst their peers in their own place, even if it's not on the platform, they continue to visit that platform. And in fact, it makes sense to identify these sorts of groups and give them their own mailing list or their own Skype area, or just connect them in some particular way, because they bond together amongst that group. And next, it always makes sense to introduce people to each other. One of the things we found is that people love to connect to those that live really close to them and those of the same age. If they meet with people that are really close to them, they're far more likely to continue participating in that community. They want to meet people that are like them, people they can meet up in real life. And if they're of the same age, they tend to have a lot in common. So you can ask members these specific questions, where they're from, and guide them to those sorts of groups, so they instantly find their own peer group amongst that community. So you'll be initiating these sorts of activities, lots of activities, ebooks, events, live interviews, live discussions, where members can interact with one another. You want to be making sure that you have separate small groups that are either on or off the platform, and you want to be making introductions within that community based upon their age or their location. And the final thing is to build habits. How many of you have read Near's work? Booked? Okay, so I strongly recommend you buy this book. I'm not going to cover everything, but the one thing I would say is that we want to bring in as many existing habits into that community as possible. We were working with an organisation just over a year ago, and it was an organisation that's trying to get an internal online community off the ground. And what we found is that there were lots of members that when they participated, when they visited, they would participate. But it was very difficult to get them into the habit of regularly participating within that community. And we tried emailing them every day, but that email just went to the bottom of their inbox and never got to the top. We tried having their boss tell them, you must participate in that community. That didn't go well. And one of the things we found is that when we were visiting that community and you looked up the web page, it would always take you to the homepage of that company. There was like some server setting they had. And we found that if we could change that homepage, so by default, the first page they would visit would be that community, we found that instantly far more people were participating. We found that trigger within the existing behavior they had, and we used that trigger to get people participating. And what we found very frequently is that if we can identify what that trigger is, if we can find something within the existing routines that our members have, we can get people regularly participating within that community. We've also found it's very difficult to build a community if you don't have a good notification system in place. You need to have a notification system, not a digest because people don't tend to read or open these things at all. And you want to have a notification system that is opt out, and you want to have a notification system where it will be either a notification of a new discussion or a response to an existing contribution. And finally, we found that there's a lot of myths in the community space as well. One of the biggest ones is that your lurkers will become regularly participating members. We can all think of examples where a lurker did become a regular, but there aren't many community professionals in the world that have converted more than 5% of their lurkers into regular participants. And it makes far more sense not to worry about your lurkers so much, but to worry about the people that are arriving in your community for the very first time. Put in place an intensive journey that's going to build the habit from the moment they join that community. So for example, if we're trying to grow the community of HR professionals, and it's HR professionals that are sharing their funny human resource stories, we might ask the members to collaborate on an ebook where everyone shared their best human resource story, their funny story. We might give everyone in that community a link where they can share that ebook on Twitter, on Facebook, and make sure that it gets widely linked in every different type of forum. And then we might also have a specific page that people visit when they click on the links back from that book itself. And what we'll find is that once people click on that link, we then get them to share their own funny stories with the second edition. So that's the first contribution. Then we will invite them to an event where they can talk about their other funny stories or some particular issue. That's the second contribution within the community. Then we might have some other discussions, something else that they can participate in. And we'll schedule those first 3 weeks of activities so we can build that habit in place. We can have those habits so people join the community and before they even know it, they're regularly visiting that community. So don't ask people to participate within that community, ask people to do something specific within that community. So that's going to get kicked off the stage in a second. So identify a trigger within the existing behavior, have an opt-out notification system, and build that program of activities so when people join that community and they begin participating, it becomes a habit of what they're doing. I think I have to go quick. So align your concept with an existing motivation, respond quickly and respond well, make sure that members feel very unique within your community, build real relationships, make sure you're doing lots of things and providing as many opportunities as possible for people to build real relationships through shared experiences, and make sure that you bring in as many of their existing habits as possible. Make sure that you have as many things as possible that people can do within your community that they used to do elsewhere. If you want to get in touch with me, that's the place to do it. Thank you so much, it's great to be here.